Hi guys, I hope you're having a really great day today. I want to talk to you a little bit today about how to read nonfiction pieces of literature. The great thing about reading nonfiction is that we've been writing nonfiction in class, and we can use the same knowledge that we gained from writing nonfiction and apply it to reading to make it so much easier. To begin with, I want you to think about the reasons that we read nonfiction. Think about the things that we read that are not fictional pieces. Even things like Facebook and Twitter are nonfiction pieces. Your textbooks, essays that you might read for a class. So what's the point? Why are we reading those things? Some people might be reading it to get information, to learn something new. Those are probably the main reason that you're reading nonfiction pieces. Other times we're just reading because we're interested. Maybe sometimes we're reading because we're trying to understand an argument and the author is trying to defend a position to us. And so we're trying to understand what they're saying. Understanding why you're reading nonfiction or the purpose for reading the piece can really help you understand the piece a little bit better as well. When we read nonfiction, really we're trying to answer 5 questions. And those questions is, what's the point of this piece? How is the author developing or proving that point? How does the author use his examples or illustrations to create logic for us? And then finally we need to analyze and decide, is this logical or believable, the piece that we read? And what's the author's attitude, and how does his or her attitude toward this topic influence the credibility of the piece itself? Now I want you to remember that when you read nonfiction pieces, you can apply the same knowledge that you have from writing the nonfiction pieces. So let's start with the introduction. We know that one of the goals for reading nonfiction is to figure out what the topic is. And then we want to figure out what's the purpose for talking about that topic. So our goal is, what is the topic and what's the purpose? We know that authors write nonfiction to inform us about things, to explain things to us, to describe things, and even to persuade us about things. If you'll remember in your writing, you always wrote your thesis statement, and the thesis statement's job was to tell the reader what your essay was going to be about and what your position was on a topic. If we know that's true for us as writers, then we can know as readers that's also true. That if we're looking for a topic or a purpose of a piece, we probably can find that in the thesis statement. The thesis statement is always found in the introduction of an essay, usually in the first paragraph, sometimes in the second paragraph. We also know that as a writer, we always wrote topic sentences at the beginning of each body paragraph. And those topic sentences told the reader what the point was for that paragraph. So as a reader, we can take that knowledge and use the topic sentences of each body paragraph to kind of outline for us what the author's primary points are. If I had to give you a strategy for answering the questions, what is the topic and what is the author's purpose, I would say first, read the title. The title can give you clues about the topic of a piece before you ever start reading. Secondly, I would say read the first 2 paragraphs carefully. Look with detective eyes for that thesis statement. That thesis is going to tell you what this paper is about and what the point is. If you have read the first 2 paragraphs and you still don't really understand what you're reading for or what the purpose is, stop reading. Go back to the first paragraph and reread it. Read it slower, read it a little bit more carefully, and read it until you understand what it is you're reading for, what the topic is, and what the purpose of the piece is for. If you continue reading without that knowledge, you won't understand what you're reading anyway, and so it's worth our time to be a little bit slower at the beginning of our reading. If you're unsure whether or not you have the right topic or the right position, go ahead to jump down to the conclusion. Remember, in our conclusion, we restated the thesis sentence. And so we can anticipate that our author is going to do that as well. And so if we peruse the conclusion, we can decide whether or not we're accurate in what we think this essay might be about. Moving on, I want you to remember the way that we constructed our body paragraphs. And we said that body paragraphs were kind of like pie. And we had a point and an illustration and an explanation. In nonfiction reading, your paragraphs are going to be set up very similar to this. Your point is that topic sentence. Then you're going to have an author give you an illustration, and finally they're going to explain to you how that illustration proves or supports their point. So let's look at this a little bit more closely. When we're reading, our goal is to figure out how the author is developing their points and whether or not they're logically explaining that development. We know that the illustrations that an author uses to develop a point can include things like facts, quotes, examples, and stories. When you're reading, you're going to be looking for those things. Then as we talk about how the author creates logic, we know that logic is created through cause and effect relationships, through compare and contrast relationships, through descriptive relationships, process and classification. We see those a little bit more rarely, but cause and effect and compare and contrast and description are probably our top ways to explain. So as you're reading the body of a nonfiction essay, your job is to find that point. What's the point of this paragraph? Then look to see how is the author developing the point. Is he using stories? Is he using facts? Is he using examples? And then how are they explaining the logic, compare and contrast, cause and effect, and so on. A strategy I might encourage you to use as you're reading nonfiction is to underline all of the illustrations that you see. If you see a fact, if you see a story, if you see a quote as you're reading, underline that so that you know that these are the tools that the author is using to try to convince you. Then, as you're thinking about the logic, maybe make a note to yourself in the margin. Okay? Is this example giving me something to compare to something else? Is this example giving me a cause and effect relationship? What's happening in this paragraph? If you have those notes for yourself, then it'll be easier for you to come back and reference them later on, and then it will eliminate having to reread everything over and over again. Finally, after we read, we may be asked to make some conclusions or draw some conclusions about a text. We might be asked to decide whether or not the author's logic is believable, whether or not it's credible. And then we might be asked to decide what the author's attitude is toward the topic and how we might be able to figure that out. Remember that these are inference questions. You will not be able to find the answers to these questions directly in the text. Instead, you're going to have to use textual evidence and then draw a conclusion based on what you see in the text. So a strategy you might use to approach this task is to circle any words or phrases as you're reading that seem to have strong emotion attached to them. And when you're done, consider the emotional feeling connected to these words or phrases. That can be a big clue to you about how the author feels on this topic. Also, take a look at that conclusion. Consider any final thoughts that the author is leaving you with and see if those thoughts can give you an indication of the author's perspectives and what they're trying to say. I hope that this lesson has given you a chance to break apart how to read nonfiction and to see that being able to read nonfiction well is simply the reverse side of being able to write nonfiction well. And we're using the same skills and the same strategies. I'm going to have you practice this now using some ACT passages, and hopefully this will give you a good jump start on your ACT nonfiction reading practice. Have a great day, guys.